أزور سيدي ومولاي Should I start now? Should I wait 5-10 minutes and start? Awesome. All right. Where is he right now? All right, 7:15 I'll start. Where is that? 7:11. I'll set like 7. That's bad. أزور سيدي ومولاي ومعتمدي ورجاي سيدي ومولاي أبا عبد الله الحسين زيارة عني وعن والدي ووالد والدي وعن جميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات قربة طاعة إلى الله تعالى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدتي نساء العالمين،
السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا أبا عبد الله لقد عظمت الرزية وجلت وعظمت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل الإسلام. وجلت وعظمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات. فلعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت، ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها. ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم، ولعن الله الممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشياعهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم. يا أبا عبد الله إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان، ولعن الله بني أمية قاطبا، ولعن الله ابن مرجانة، ولعن الله عمر بن سعد، ولعن الله شمرا، ولعن الله أمة أسرجت والجمت وتنقبت لقتالك. بأبي أنت وأمي لقد عظم مصابي بك، فأسأل الله الذي يكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونصب لك الحرب، وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم. وأبرأ إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانه وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشياعكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم، وأتقرب إلى الله، ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم، وبالبراءة من أعدائكم والناصبين لكم الحرب، وبالبراءة من أشياعهم وأتباعهم. إني سلم لمن سالمكم، وحرب لمن حاربكم، وولي لمن والاكم، وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي أكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم، ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم، أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة، وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة. وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله، وأن يرزقني طلب آثاري مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم. وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصابي بكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبته، مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد، ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إنا إذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية وابن آكلة الأكباد اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية، عليهم منك اللعنة وأبد العابدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه. اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعن منك والعذاب الأليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم، وبموالاة نبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم العن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد، وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جادت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله، اللهم لعنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر الناد مني لزيارتكم all together. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم لعن أول ظالم باللعن مني، وابدأ به أولا ثم الثانية والثالثة والرابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا، ولعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجانة وعمر بن سعد وشمران وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. سجود. اللهم لك حمد حمد الشاكرين لك على مصابهم، الحمد لله على عظيم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بدلا وجم دون الحسين عليه السلام. وصل اللهم على محمد وآل الطاهرين.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Respected scholars and my dear brothers and sisters, Salamun Alaykum wa rahmatullah. Azamallahu ujuruna bi musabina bil Husayn alayhi salam. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the tawfiq, the means and the resources to organize a 4-night Majalis program to mark the 40th of Shahadas of Karbala. For the next 4 nights, we are very fortunate to have the lectures delivered by our visiting guest scholar, Syed Kamil Kazmi. Syed Kamil grew up in Kingston, Ontario, and spends most of his time in Iran, where he has been studying at the Husayn for close to 10 years now. Syed began his studies at the University of Waterloo and established the TMA there, the Shia student group, and went on to completing his degree in computer networking from St. Lawrence College. He is currently actively pursuing 2 master's programs, one in Islamic history at the Husayn and the other in counseling psychology at Yorkville University. Syed Kamil is graciously offering one-on-one counseling sessions to community members at no cost. The sign-up link has been shared on the announcements channel as well, and as well as the link to an anonymous feedback form. Before I invite Syed for the lecture, I would like to remind my dear parents to keep your children with you at all times. And please do not park in the fire lane. I've been specifically instructed to remind Mu'mineen to not park in the fire lane. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let's welcome Syed Kamil with 3 loud salawats. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين وسيما بقية الله في العرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمهم فداء صلوات. إن الله هو السلام. First and foremost, we send our salams to the awliya of Allah. I send my salams to the Imam of this time. I send my salam to the pious scholars before me. I send my salam to you, dear brothers and sisters. Salamun Alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, we have been honored and blessed with the allowance to be in the gathering, which is in fact hosted by none other but the Hujjah of Allah. We have been allowed to be part of the morning of the Alullah. This allowance itself is a huge blessing for us, one that deserves attention and shukr. Now, those of us who have found ourselves with the love of Aba Abdullah should understand that it's not the case that we are independent in having that love in our hearts. There have been countless creatures of Allah who have painstakingly raised us and developed us and allowed for us to get to the station that we are at. So now in the coming of ourselves, our bodies and our nufus to this aza, in fact, we are also remembering those who have a haqq on our neck, the zawil huquq. Those individuals who, by their efforts, Allah developed us. For the remembrance of all of those who have perhaps passed away, are not with us now, or perhaps on their walk towards Karbala, for their eternal safety and their temporary worldly safety. Recite a loud salawat, please. See, sometimes we generally know some things, but because we have not digested that information, we have a difficulty in identifying those things. We also have a difficulty in applying those things. Okay? So this digestion is something very important. And in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses a very good example for us to understand how the lack of digestion can create a lot of problems for us and our nufus. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu uses shaitan as a farmer would use sheep manure around a plant. The example of shaitan has been mentioned in the Holy Quran in the hopes that it serves as sheep manure for the plant, the nufus, to grow by appropriately interacting with those examples. Let's look at some of these examples today. Salawat, please. There are two places in the Holy Quran where the word pattern is exact, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is quoting shaitan, the words of shaitan. You see, whenever we look at the Holy Quran, we have to understand that not only the words, but the manner in which it's presented also has hikmah for us. It was possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come and present what shaitan is about to say in various forms. He could have summarized for us the essence of what shaitan was talking about. Instead, he quotes shaitan. So in that quotation, whenever you see these quotations taking place in the Holy Quran, understand that there was another way of saying a very similar message to us. So now, if the quotation is brought to us, there lies some very detailed information in the manner of presenting that particular idea that we need to learn from. So, Surah A'raf, verse number 12. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to shaitan. He says, قال ما منعك أن لا تسجد إذ أمرتك. Allah says to shaitan, what prevented you from doing sujood when I commanded you? Okay. قال, shaitan is saying now something. Allah is quoting this. This phrase is actually repeated almost identically in two places. قال أنا خير منه خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. Shaitan comes about and says that I'm better than him. I'm khair. I'm better than him. خلقتني من نار, and he gives a reasoning too. He doesn't just stop at saying I'm better than him. He doesn't just stop at the hukum. He says I have a justification for my hukum. Okay. خلقتني من نار, you've created me from fire. وخلقته من طين, and you've created him from طين, earth, clay, the material realm. It is said to shaitan, قال فاحبط منها فما يكون لك أن تتكبر فيها فاخرج إنك من الصاغرين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells shaitan, listen, if you're not obeying me, then get down, fakhruj, go out of the bounds of this heaven. Why? إِنَّكَ مِنَ الصَّاغِرِينَ. You don't belong here. You are somebody who is lowly. Saghir, small, same root word. You're somebody who is lowly. Let's take some points from these two verses that we've just gone over. First point to take. Shaitan says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he declares something very important. He says, I believe and I declare that you are my creator. He says, khalaqtani. So it's not the case that shaitan is saying that actually I'm oblivious of the fact whether you created me or not. He is completely testifying to the fact that he has one creator, and that is Allah. But this testification, this declaration of the fact that he believes Allah to be his creator is not enough for him. Let's go further. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he tells shaitan that why did you not do sajda to Adam when I commanded you, and shaitan responds after Allah punishes him. We have to learn that in fact, in the manner in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes somebody who doesn't believe or obey him is such that he first, it's not the case that the simple disobedience and he was then ikhraj of. There's a communication happening there, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows for shaitan some room of growth. He asks him, why? Why did you not do sajda when I commanded you? Okay? Sometimes, I'll try to speak louder to help assist you guys, inshallah. Sometimes when we've been given the capacity and the allowance by means of a question, in fact, that in of itself is an allowance, right? That perhaps we will backtrack. So shaitan in this particular moment doesn't do that. He doubles down. Okay? He says what? He says, I have a justification for not obeying you, Allah, my creator. And then he presents his justification before his Rabb. See, sometimes it's the case that we know something, generally speaking, but we don't know that particular item in its actuality, and hence it's very difficult for us to apply it. Shaitan knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is his khaliq. He knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the khaliq of Hazrat Adam as well. He forgot or was not able to see really that in fact the khaliq is also the malik. The one who's created is in fact the owner. When the owner commands, the owned must obey. When the owner commands, the owned, if it's true ownership. See, the ownership that we have over our the things that we own, our car, our toys, our phones, our laptops, sometimes they may glitch. Inshallah, this iPad doesn't glitch. But in fact, sometimes the things that we own, sometimes they may glitch. And we may command it to scroll down, but it gets stuck and it hangs, it doesn't obey. True ownership doesn't work this way. Once shaitan understood that in fact Allah is the true owner, the khaliq, that should have led him towards the understanding that he is in fact the malik. And hence this obedience should have come from that particular understanding, that in fact, when the owner tells his slave, do this or do that, the slave has no right to cock back and say, I don't wish to. Or present another justification contra or opposing the malik. Salawat, please. Sometimes there are impurities within our nafs that put a veil on us and they prevent us from acting on these knowledge and understanding how to apply them. In Surah Sad as well, it is quoted, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, قال يا إبليس ما منعك أن تسجد لما خلقت بيدي أستكبرت أم كنت من العالين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling shaitan that, O Iblis, what prevented you from doing sajda to that which I had created from my own two hands? Astakbarta, were you being proud? See, there's two levels of understanding pride here. Right? One level is to say that perhaps shaitan was being proud towards the creature he was being told to bow down before. But in fact, the actual issue is completely different altogether. It's not about the person he was being told to bow down before. It's about who was telling him to bow down to. The one commanding, the one in authority, That is the one he had opposed. And that is the essence of why Allah comes and says, are you doing kibr? And then there's an here, or. What does the words after say? Kunta minal alin. Meaning, had you actually done that particular bowing down and listened to the command of Allah, then even what might appear as putting you down actually is making you one of the alin. Both the part that follows and the part that precedes both of them, in fact, are linked towards this particular relationship between shaitan and his commander. Salawat, please. Okay, so sometimes we know generally some things, but because we have not digested that information, it can become very difficult in applying those things. And then we might not see the occurrences of that particular ilm in our life at all. We might know something, but when it comes to doing something, we see that we are empty-handed. We're not acting on our knowledge. So shaitan generally knew that Allah is the Khaliq, right? But when it came time to digesting that information and recognizing it in a time where it was going against perhaps his innate want, all of a sudden he forgot he hadn't digested Khaliq properly. And he revolted against his commander. He revolted against his master. He revolted against his Malik. Okay, we're talking about the idea of voice and silence, right? Speaking and being quiet. Why are we covering this particular topic at the time of Arbaeen? Well, the ayyam of Arbaeen, they represent a very special time. They represent a time where the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, in fact, they focused on an everlasting battle where the weaponry was words and the armor was silence. Sayyidah Zainab Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, after the 11th of Muharram, participated in an everlasting battle where the weapons were words and the weaponry was silence. And by this means, they were able to shake the foundation of Bani Umayyah. You see, in Sham, there's a very interesting social engineering at play. At the time of the first Khalifa, Yazid ibn Abu Sufyan is in the Sham area. And he begins social engineering on the people of Sham until when? Until all the way until Yazid himself. So multiple generations, Yazid ibn Muawiyah, then Yazid ibn Abu Sufyan, then his younger brother Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan, then after that, Yazid ibn Muawiyah. These three individuals entirely focusing on one particular city and having the rulership over there as well, contorting the way the people think. To the point where when Amirul Mu'mineen becomes Shaheed, people are actually left asking, did Amirul Mu'mineen pray? Na'udhu billah. At that level, the social engineering had taken place. So, the topic we're covering regarding speech and silence really, kalam and samt really, is innate to this time. Our masters, the leaders of the caravan that we wish to join, in fact use this particular opportunity, this era, this time to wage an everlasting war where words were weapons and silence was armor. Salawat, please. And as is customary amongst the lovers of Abu Abdullah, this time around the bodies of mu'mineen and these pure individuals start to walk towards the epicenter of Tawheed on this earth. The epicenter, the reminder, the flag bearer of Allah on this earth. And they walk towards the most pure source in creation, Abu Abdullah himself. In a very similar manner, those individuals held a little bit far, not able to physically walk towards the epicenter, we take a different journey. We try to go towards the epicenter metaphysically. The importance in going towards Karbala itself is immense, for it is the groundwork of changing our actual self, our metaphysical self. So those individuals going through the pain and difficulty of taking each step towards Karbala, in fact, they're laying the foundations for perhaps their nafs to start to take steps towards Abu Abdullah as well. But now the pure intellects align themselves towards the qibla of intellect, and then the pure nufus and spirits align themselves towards the qibla of perfection and purity, Abu Abdullah himself. Salawat, please. When we talk about speech and we talk about blessings and we talk about the manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth in various ways by means of His creatures, we often come across this idea of Rahmaniya and Rahimiya. It's so often talked about concept. That in fact, the Rahmaniya of Allah is something that encompasses all creatures, be they be good, bad, pious, unpious. And the Rahimiyya is a little bit more specific. Surah Taha helps us. It says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa. The Rahman is standing on his throne, standing on the throne for somebody who neither can stand by means of leg because he's not bound by that, nor does he require a throne which can bind him. It means what? That the Rahman is in fact an authority, he's in charge. Every aspect of creation is through him. The verse after actually indicates this understanding. لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا وَمَا تَحْتَ الثَّرَى. Says to Allah belongs every single thing between the sky and the earth. Everything. There's details here that for the lack of brevity, I can't mention right now. So, Rahmaniya is now this general assistance and guidance where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving it equally to all, be they good, bad. And Rahimiyya of Allah is now what? It's a very specific category of actions of Allah. It's still an act of Allah, but it's a very specific act of Allah. One where your and my free will is actually a participant. Your and my free will, actually by the permission of Allah, is a converter mechanism making the general blessing of Allah into an actual blessing for me. If you were to apply it to the example of shaitan, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded shaitan and gave him that amr, to be on the receiving end of the command of Allah is a great honor. It's rahmah. Now, shaitan did not have this mechanism within him. There was something preventing this mechanism from playing, which did what? Which was supposed to take this rahmah, this command from Allah, and convert it into an actual benefit from shaitan, making him one of the aleen. Shaitan lacked this capacity. He was not able to convert the rahmah, the rahmaniyya of Allah for him, into the rahimiyya of Allah for him. Salawat, please. So you see, the capacity to communicate is very similar. The ability to communicate, the ability to speak is rahmah. The good can speak, the bad can speak, the old can speak, and the young can speak. The capacity to communicate is rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's up to me and you to decide really that if we're going to follow the footsteps of our enemy or not. Our absolute effort is to make sure we don't follow his footsteps. What did he do? he prevented himself willingly from what? Converting Rahmaniya of Allah into the Rahimiya of Allah by disobeying the command of Allah. Now, for me and you who have been given the capacity to communicate, it's up to us whether we choose to now convert that capacity to speak into something that is an actual blessing for us, or by not doing that, throw ourselves into the pit of flame and fire, which is the wrath of Allah. See, if we follow the steps of the Rajim, we slowly are becoming Rajim ourselves. However, the invitation has been sent out to follow the steps of the Rahim, not the Rajim. Salawat, please. Some people learn best by images. They're not able to see concepts in a very conceptual manner. That's okay. Unfortunately, I don't have a board here to draw, but Allah has given me a magical board. So I'll use that, inshallah. It's voice activated. Okay. Form an image of a father helping a toddler make their first steps towards him. Okay? The father distances the toddler from himself, creates distance, and by creating that particular distance is doing what? Is allowing for the child to now take steps towards him. Okay? For the child to be able to take, for the child to take any steps, for the child to actualize the capacity of walking, the child must in fact be first distanced. Otherwise, that capacity to learn how to walk won't be there for the child, right? So to create that capacity, an initial distancing is created. Okay? Now the child is driven by love. He loves his Baba, right? The child, by using that very distancing hand that is holding him far, by using that very hand that's holding him far, starts to take small steps towards the owner of those hands, his Baba, to be in his embrace. Okay? The father is giving that particular child rahmah by creating distance. And that child is converting that capacity, that blessing for himself, into rahimiyah by following his love for the father and actively using that same distance maker, that thing that was holding him further away, by using that very path to come towards his father. So, for me and you, the blessing of communication, something that sometimes might hold us away from Allah if we slip and we make a mistake, we have to be like that toddler, using that very item in of itself to take steps towards the source of our existence. Salawat, please. Another loud salawat, please. You see, the father can't micromanage the child, right? The father can't hold the feet of the child and move them forcefully because that's not the child walking. The child doesn't develop. The child's not taking space and place. So in a very similar manner, if I am to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in fact, it's me who has to change my communication patterns and capacities. Otherwise, change will not happen. This applies to every human. For the journey is mine, and the one taking the steps is me as well. Of course, holding the blessed hands of Rahmaniyya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So communication is rahmah. Speaking and actually communicating is the manifestation of rahmah for all of us. Imagine if you couldn't communicate. We'd be in a lot of troubles as human beings. What is communication? Well, it's simply the transference of meaning. Right? Today we'll fiddle a little bit with this idea of the transferring of meaning on the outside. We have very little time left. But in another manner, which we'll cover tomorrow, inshallah, thinking is also a type of communication. But it is the inner communication. It deals with really our nafs and the capacities of our nafs. We'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. Now, there are 3 ways of looking at godly communication. Okay? One way is you can look at communication to be in line with the command of Allah, as it's one way of getting to the blessing of Allah for myself. Okay? Hence, some ahadith would call this type of communication an example of worship of the trader. I'm after some sort of a benefit. I want to communicate nicely so that I can get the rewards of that particular communication. Okay? Another way is to say that I'm communicating in line with the commands of my master, my Malik, because I want to be saved from jumping into trouble, Allah's wrath. The hadith would call this type of communication, this way of looking at communication, an example of the worship of the fearful. There's a higher way as well, but we'll leave that for another day, inshallah. All 3 ways, right? The way of the trader, the way of the fearful, and the third, the higher way, the way of the ahrar, the free individuals, who are free from everything, even themselves really, and focused on nothing but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All 3 ways are worship. All 3 ways, as long as they are obeying the command of the Malik, they are in fact worship. If you take nothing else from today's lecture, this is the take-home message. Allah has given the ability to communicate, to pull His creatures closer to Himself. If I am communicating in a manner which does not actively pull His creatures to Him, I am one of His creatures. I'm on the wrong team. There are some examples of mistakes that can be made by the trader who worships and the fearful who worship. And we'll look at some of these examples, inshallah. Salawat. You see, sometimes a spouse will come and say that, I want respect from my spouse. This is their goal. They say, Allah is Aziz and I want Izzah. Whether they're aware of this particular idea that this demand for Izzah actually stems from their source or not is another matter. But they come to this conclusion that in fact, I want Izzah. I want respect from my spouse. Okay? But when they go towards achieving this, they know for a fact that achieving of Izzah, achieving of respect for myself is something good, is something that is in fact something I should be striving for, something I've been commanded to strive for. But when it comes to actually achieving this, they may convert this rahmah of Allah, this innate will inside them from Allah that says, I'm motivating you, O nafs, to go and look for respect. They'll convert this rahmah into something that is not rahimiyya, but the opposite of that, the wrath. They'll make a mistake, they'll slip. How will they slip? They might start to communicate by means of yelling. They might start comparisons. They might start to give ultimatums. All the while, they might be just like shaitan, justifying every action of theirs with a reasoning. Look, I have an innate need to be respected. And hence, I'm communicating that need. I'm pursuing that need. Not aware that in fact the manner in which it's supposed to be pursued is also under the commands of Allah. Salawat, please. This is where a person might come and say to themselves that in fact it's my right. Or they might start the chicken first or egg. They'll say, if you respect me, then I'll respect you. Okay. And then after a while of actually not converting the rahmah of Allah into rahmaniyah, into rahimiyya, at the edge of separation, or God forbid worse, the spouse might even come and say that, I wish I had cut my own tongue, for the pain of cutting of my tongue is less than the pain that I'm going through now by abusing this rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see, shaitan, the difficulty that was there in doing sajda, is that greater, or being rajim till qiyamah and being on the team opposing Imam Husayn, which is a greater difficulty? The one who understands that in fact Allah has given me capacity to communicate, He has given me within myself the initiation and the motivation to communicate too, which is what? He's made me want respect. He's made me want izzah. The Aziz wants creatures who are also the creatures of the Aziz. But He's also dictated to me how I should communicate that particular request. An example for the ones who are fearful in their approach to communications. Here you might see parents that are scared for their children committing haram. They're scared. There's an innate rahmah of Allah within them, which is that in fact they are the Rabbayane Saghira, right? The smaller Rabb. So in fact, they are the nurturers, and just like how a gardener doesn't want any corruption in his crop, they too innately do not want corruption in their kids. They see themselves as the Rabb of the child. Now the source of this particular motivation is rahmah. It's true. But when they go about now manifesting this fear of theirs, this action of theirs into play, when they're trying to now keep their kids away from haram, they might do so in a very negative manner, not in a very positive manner. They may be fearful that their kids may be addicted to screens, or addicted to substance, or God forbid, addicted to people, both haram relationships in terms of bad friends and the other kind. These parents who have this natural, pure, true fear that in fact they do not want their children to go astray, when it comes to actually implementing that fear in the right way, they may slip. They may start waging a war of words at home, yelling slurs, cursing, put-downs, comparisons. And as they follow the footsteps of shaitan in this negative way, shaitan is leading them to hellfire, right? As they follow the footsteps of shaitan, the heat in the house intensifies. Very soon, sometimes parents may go so far that they make the house environment perfect for developing charcoals, not for developing live, young, potential-filled kids. Salawat, please. You see, as a parent, we have to understand that when we're speaking to our toddlers, now I'm only touching some aspects. You see, this concept of communication, it's the amount that we can cover today. It's not the tip of the iceberg. It is the speck on the tip of the iceberg. Okay? So I'll just cover some aspects of it, but there's a lot more to say. So instead of kid, we'll look at toddler, right? So when we speak with toddlers, we have to understand that they need you to tell them once, and after that, they need assistance in following through with your command. Okay? So when you tell your toddler, clean up your toys, they don't need you to repeat that. They need you to tell them once, and after them, encourage them to clean up the toys without words now. Go to the ground, help them out, create other means of communication. What happens if you get lazy and you only use words? What happens? If you do that and you keep repeating the same thing, a couple of things happen. Consider these dimensions very carefully, please. As you're repeating, you're expecting a result, and the toddler is not able to comply as efficiently, and hence all of a sudden he's not doing what you want him to do. And what do? You add petrol to the fire, you keep repeating, all of a sudden your nafs, it only has a capacity in terms of its strength, it becomes weak and you get fed up. The parent now, when they continuously verbally give directions while they see their toddler is failing, it's like, imagine you have a high schooler, he's just right now failed an exam, and the teacher, instead of doing anything else, puts the same paper in front of them, without necessarily teaching them how they've failed, what they've done, assisting them, taking them through a developmental process where they can be guided towards doing the next iteration better. It's exactly like the teacher saying, you know what, you failed this exam, let me put the exact same paper before you again and again and again and again. What does that do? Both the teacher is getting frustrated, the parent is getting frustrated, because what they want is not happening, right? Something else is happening too. You're destroying the child too. You're teaching him, at one point, it's okay to ignore, because a child, after a certain level of failure, says, you know what, this is beyond me, and he ignores that particular command. That toddler is very pure in its nature. After certain levels of failure, that toddler gives up, says, it's beyond me. Salawat, please. The lack of clarity in how to go about tarbiyah of toddlers creates for us, in fact, frustration. Okay? When we keep making that mistake, it's possible that we get to the point where we might even convert that potentially obedient toddler into a disobedient menace. Who's converted that potentially obedient toddler into a disobedient menace? The parent who did not understand how to communicate effectively. Communication is rahmah. Okay? Only if you apply it appropriately can you convert it into rahimiyah for yourself. Salawat, please. I will not bother you much longer. The last example is important. I will share it with you, inshallah. Sometimes we may have a spouse that does not consider the way that their other spouse unpacks things, unpacks words and meanings, and prioritizes meanings for themselves. If a partner is oblivious of their other partner, if a spouse is oblivious of how their other partner takes in meaning, right? They may say a lot, but feel that very little was heard. This lack of considering the other partner's intake mechanism, if repeated, might create some things within them. They may feel misunderstood or unheard. Other things could happen too on the receiving end, just like the toddler. Feeling misunderstood and unheard is on their end, but they're also destroying the other side. You see, this is a very good example to kind of display this analogy. If I give you a nail and I say, please put this nail on the wall, okay? You have a hammer, you have a nail on the wall. If you don't apply these three things in an appropriate manner, you will damage the nail and you'll break the wall. The effect of an inappropriate communication method damages both the speaker and the one being spoken to. In this particular case, the spouse who's speaking feels misunderstood or unheard. And the partner, in fact, who is on the receiving end of that particular communication may feel attacked or put down, while the intent of the speaker was not to do that. When this happens, typically the speaker might end up wondering, what did I do wrong? See, we have to keep in mind that the problems we face in this particular world is sometimes due to inappropriate communication methods. But guess what? the one who's sustaining that problem for you is who? In fact, Allah Himself. That problem is like that arm held out before you, distancing you from Allah initially, correct? But if you're able to learn from the difficulty, right? If you're able to learn from that particular problem's effects, and that is why Allah has put the effect of the problem in this world too, so you can learn from it. Right? Then you are able to take that very problem and correct your steps and go towards the source of rahmah. The spouse who is not able to study the unpacking mechanism of his spouse has no one else to blame when he's damaged the nail and he's damaged the wall. Salawat, please. Remember that the arm length distance that the toddler was held back at is nothing but the manifestation of the love of the father. The father wanted to teach and grow that child. It's out of love the father left every other thing he could be doing. Went on his knees just to distance the child from him. Why? Because he wants to develop that particular child. We have been gathered and allowed to gather in the gathering of Aba Abdullah, and our hearts feel sorrow for the turmoil and anguish that Aba Abdullah went through. It's a very difficult thing for us. Allah has given this pain and anguish in our heart. In fact, this is rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're able to take this pain and convert it into steps going towards Karbala, if we're able to take this mourning and convert it into steps going towards Aba Abdullah, then we're converting the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into actual rahmaniyah for myself, into actual rahimiyah for myself. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Master, we come to you with empty hands. Fill our hands with tears of change. How difficult it was for Sayyida Zainab when she had to use the words of guidance, while the people who had beheaded her brother were before her, while the severed head of her master was before her. Where did she get this motivation to communicate with guidance? Perhaps she saw her motivation in her Mawla when she saw on the battlefield of Karbala, when the enemies had gathered around him, those who could strike him with arrows struck him so, and those who could strike him with swords struck him so, and those who had nothing threw rocks at him. But this great difficulty did not hold him back from his Rabb Arab, he continued the good fight. And even then, his words were guiding us. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. May Allah accept this qaleel ibadah. May He allow us to use His rahmah and convert it for ourselves into actual good. Matam Husayn. Ya 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 Husayn.
Ya Husayn. Ya Husayn. Ya Husayn. Ya Husayn. Ya Husayn.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين. زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. رؤوس علقنا مرفوعة ذبيحة والأشلاء على الثرى تبقى طريحة. رؤوس علقنا مرفوعة ذبيحة والأشلاء على الثرى تبقى طريحة. ذاك ابن خير الأنام رأسه فوق السهام. ذاك ابن خير الأنام رأسه فوق السهام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين. زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. أخي قف هنيهة خذ الوديعة. خذ جواد المنية إلى الفجيعة. أخي قف هنيهة خذ الوديعة. خذ جواد المنية إلى الفجيعة. أشبال حيدراتنا ذبيحة من السهام. أشبال حيدراتنا ذبيحة من السهام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين. زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. يا ابن طه والمرتضى يا ابن البتول. انظر كيف تنتهك حرم الرسول. يا ابن طه والمرتضى يا ابن البتول. انظر كيف تنتهك حرم الرسول. زينب تحمي الأيتام تدفع كيد اللئام. زينب تحمي الأيتام تدفع كيد اللئام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين. زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام. صريع أرض نينوى أضحى وحيدا عطشانا وظمآنا قد قضى شهيدا. صريع أرض نينوى أضحى وحيدا عطشانا وظمآنا قد قضى شهيدا يا مهدي الزمان انهد واثأر للإسلام يا مهدي الزمان انهد واثأر للإسلام الأمان الأمان يا إمام الزمان الأمان الأمان يا إمام الزمان زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين زينب تندب حسين أين يا قرة العين انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام انظر يا إمام أسبى إلى الشام يا حسين.
Let's prepare for Salah.